Lecture 12, Activity 3, page 181, The Pyramids of Egypt, an Engineering Feat.
The pyramids of ancient Egypt just never ceased to ignite the human imagination. People just continue to look at them in awe. People dream about going to Egypt to see them. What do you think it is? Is it their age? Is it their power? Just standing so tall in the harsh desert? Is it the mysteries surrounding them? The mysteries about the people who built them? The people who were buried there and the culture they had? Is it the awe we feel when we see this feat of human engineering? Structures that were built when we didn't have cranes and bulldozers and other machinery that we have today. What I'm going to do in this lecture is talk about the design and engineering of the pyramids, to give you a sense of what went into the building of these incredible structures. First, let me give you some background on the pyramids. The pyramids were built, and when we see pictures, we usually see pictures of the same group of 3 or 4 pyramids, but actually, there are more than 80 pyramids that were built along the Nile River. And those were built over almost 1,000-year period primarily, between 2700 and 1640 BC. 2700 and 1640 BC. And they were built as the tombs for kings. They were royal tombs, burial places. That was their function. And the idea behind it was that, according to the religious beliefs of the ancient Egyptians, when the king died, he was going to join the gods. And by preserving the king's body and keeping it safe, they believed that his spirit would be able to return to the body. And in this way, his power would continue to safeguard, to preserve Egypt. So in general, we have to remember that the pyramids are tombs, first and foremost. They're royal tombs, and they were designed to keep the king's body safe forever. And so the burial chambers are deep, deep, deep within the monuments. Very often, they're at the center of the monuments to protect the king's body. Now, actually, the design and engineering, no one is really sure exactly why the ancient Egyptians chose the shape of the pyramid. There is speculation. For one thing, a pyramid is a very stable, strong shape. So the idea, remember, is to protect the body forever. So they have a design that is very, very stable. It's also a very practical shape. When you don't have cranes and bulldozers and other machinery, it's a practical shape because the majority of the stone that's needed is in the bottom half. And the higher you go, the fewer stones that you need. And of course, it's the higher part that would require that much more labor to go up. So there's less work involved in building a pyramid than perhaps other structures. And also, if we look at the progression of burial structures in ancient Egypt, we can see that there was a gradual and natural progression from earlier practices. And I'm not going to go into exactly what those practices were, but over time, you can see how a pyramid would have developed from earlier styles of burial structures. If you look in your book, you can see that there are 3 main types of Egyptian pyramids. We have what's called a step pyramid, the bent pyramid, and the straight-sided pyramid. And the straight-sided pyramid is the one we usually think of when we think of a pyramid. But these other 2 pyramids are also types that you can actually see if you go to Egypt. The step pyramid is the oldest pyramid, or they're among the oldest pyramids. And they're actually basically a series of walls surrounding a central core. and the walls vary in height. Each wall is progressively smaller than the last one, so it creates the step appearance that you see in the picture. And people have speculated that this might have been a symbolic stairway to the stars. Okay, so these are the oldest pyramids. Another pyramid is the bent pyramid. And you can see that picture as well. And this might have actually been a mistake. It began as a straight-sided pyramid, but halfway up it changes, and it changes into a more gentle slope. And the idea behind it is, we wonder if maybe the engineers who created it started getting a little nervous. Maybe they panicked, and they thought that the angle was just too steep, and so they changed to a more gentle slope midway. And there's only one of these in existence. Most of the pyramids you see today in Egypt are what we call straight-sided pyramids. They're the smooth-sided pyramids that most of us imagine when we think of Egyptian pyramids. Again, there is speculation as to what the shape means. Just as I said the step pyramid may have been a symbolic stairway to the stars, some experts believe that the straight-sided pyramid, the smooth-sided pyramid, represents the rays of the sun on which the king can climb to join the gods. The connection between the sun and the king joining the gods after death. Now regarding the engineering, the core of the straight-sided pyramid is basically a step pyramid. And what the later designers did is they added additional blocks to fill the steps to create these straight sides, and as we'll talk about later, often a better and a whiter stone was added on top, as a layer on top, as a casing stone, to surround the initial blocks, and it gave an even smoother and brighter appearance. Okay, the building process. What was the process that was involved in building these incredible structures? The first thing that would happen is that a site needed to be chosen along the West Bank, always the west bank of the Nile River, and it had to be above the flood level, and on a solid rock base. And this idea of the Nile River flooding, it flooded regularly. And this flooding actually played a very important role in the building of the pyramids, but the site had to be above the flood zone, or else, once a year, the pyramid would be surrounded by water, and they didn't want that. And they also spent time calculating the position of the pyramid, because the directions that the pyramid faced were very important. So the priest would study the stars to calculate true north, and then position the pyramid accordingly. The workforce was huge. It included priests, architects, surveyors, metal workers, stonemasons, carpenters, painters, sculptors, scribes, who are the ones that kept the records, and thousands of laborers. What would happen is the workers would first make a level base for the pyramid. They have to look at the ground and figure out a way to make it level for this huge structure. And since at that time, they didn't have our modern surveying instruments, they had a special procedure for leveling the ground. What they did first was build a wall around the proposed site. And then they flooded the site with water. And then what they do is they cut holes and trenches into the ground, and they measure the level of the water and mark off the same water height in each hole and trench. And this mark would give them guidance in leveling the ground. The next thing they would have to do is quarry the stones. Now they had to have a method for breaking the stone into rough blocks, and the method they would generally use required wooden wedges. And the laborers would take pieces of wood and put them into cracks in the rock, and they would soak the wooden wedges with water, which would make them swell. And as the wood swelled, the stone would break. And only most recently, as you read, there have also been suggestions that they might have had rock saws as well. A saw that would have helped them cut the rock, But on the whole, they used this technique of soaking wood with water and having the wood expand enough to force the rock to break along a crack. Now, we're not talking about little blocks here. We're talking about rocks that weighed nearly 3 tons. So once the blocks were quarried, they were roughly squared by stonemasons, and the tools they used for this were copper chisels that didn't have any iron yet. They'd use a chisel, a copper chisel, and a mallet, a wooden hammer-like instrument, and they would roughly square these stones. Then they had to figure out, how do we transport these blocks from the quarry to the pyramid site? And this is where the ingenuity of the ancient Egyptians really becomes apparent. They knew that every year the Nile River flooded. So if the workers dragged the rocks to the edge of the flood zone, and then they waited until the flood season, the stones then could be floated right up to the edge of the desert by ship, okay? So when they were cutting the blocks from the quarry, it was the dry season. But if they managed to move those rocks to the point where they'd be within the flood zone, they could eventually then kind of float it right onto the boats, down to the pyramid sites. So, imagine that they've gotten the rocks onto the boats, down the river. Then they need to build a path from the water to the site of the pyramid. And this is where you might have seen pictures of laborers dragging these huge, huge blocks using ropes, sledges, and a great deal of human labor. You know, the Egyptians had the concept of the wheel, but interestingly enough, they didn't use wheeled vehicles or wheels for transporting materials. So really, these blocks, these 3-ton blocks, were dragged using ropes, sledges like sleds, but mainly a lot of human labor. Okay, then they would first construct a room in the center of the pyramid, which would contain the coffin of the king. The word used for this stone coffin is sarcophagus. S-A-R-C-O-P-H-A-G-U-S. Sarcophagus. What was inside the burial chamber? In addition to the sarcophagus, many of the chambers had on the walls descriptions of the changes the king would go through until he became a god. There are also some false doors in the room. People believed that the king's spirit could pass through these doors, and surrounding the burial chamber there were often some other rooms which contained food and other objects for the king's eternal comfort. And it is these rooms with the food and objects which have provided an incredible amount of information about the lifestyles of ancient Egypt. Now, the sides of the pyramid were built one layer at a time, and they would use ramps. Remember, again, no cranes, no machines to lift the rocks, but they would build ramps going up, and they'd haul the rocks up the ramps using ropes and levers to maneuver the huge blocks into position. And finally, when the pyramid reached the planned height, they would put a casing stone. As I said earlier, the casing stone was put over the rough stone, and this casing stone was made of a very white limestone. Now, once the stones were in place, workers would remove the ramp and polish the sides of the pyramid as they went down, so that the white limestone shone in the sun. And it's too bad, because over the years, most of the casing blocks have been stolen or used for other projects. And so what we see nowadays in the desert is not what the ancient Egyptians saw. What the ancient Egyptians saw was a structure that had the same shape, but was much smoother and covered with a very bright white. And the top may even have been capped with gold. We don't see this now. The last step, finally, the path leading to the pyramid from the river, would be broken up or destroyed. Okay, before I end this talk, I'd like to tell you about one of the pyramids. Just a little bit of detail about one of the more researched pyramids. And this is called the Great Pyramid of Khufu. K-H-U-F-U. Khufu. And Khufu was a king who ruled from 2551 BC to 2528 BC. 2551 to 2528 BC. He's also called Cheops. That was his Greek name, Cheops. C-H-E-O-P-S. And the Great Pyramid is one of the pyramids that you often see in pictures. It's right near Cairo, in an area called Giza, G-I-Z-A. And it's the largest of all pyramids. In fact, it's the largest stone building in the world. It was originally 481 feet tall, and for those of you who use the metric system, 146.5 meters tall. But actually now it's much smaller. It's only 449 feet tall, or 137 meters. And as I said before, the reason for this is that we've lost that bright limestone casing, that bright white casing. So it's lost almost 40 feet in height due to this. It was built with almost 2.5 million blocks. To be more exact, 2,300,000 blocks. And remember, I said these blocks are not small. An average block in this pyramid weighs 2.25 tons, 5,000 pounds. So imagine, 2,300,000 blocks, and the average block weighs 2.25 tons. Think of the human labor that went into this. And I said it's located in Giza, which is near Cairo, very near Cairo. In fact, it's amazing to go there because you're in Cairo, you're in a major city, and you're driving or taking a taxi, a bus, and all of a sudden, behind the houses, behind the buildings, you see the tops of the pyramids. It's that close to the city. Anyway, the Great Pyramid is a straight-sided pyramid, and the blocks fit together so perfectly that you can't even get a knife blade in between them. So when we talk about feats of engineering, this is an amazing feat. That not only is it made with these huge stones, but also that they're put together so perfectly that you can't even get a knife blade between the stones. Estimates for how long it took to build are about 20 years. Researchers are thinking that it took about 20 years to build and required a labor force of 20,000 or thereabouts. Although estimates vary. Who were these 20,000 people, and what was their life like? Well, that's going to be another lecture. For today, I'd just like you to think about, reflect on these pyramids. These pyramids of ancient Egypt allow us glimpses into worlds of long ago. And it makes me wonder when I think about them, what is our legacy to the future? What legacy are we going to pass down to our descendants? What's going to remain of us and our technological achievements 5,000 years in the future? I think that these are questions that are worth pondering. What do you